Welcome to this Trailhead Live session. This one is called Business Analysis as a Skill Set and Not a Job Title. And this is another in the set of analysis Trailhead Lives that I'm recording. So my name is Ian Gotts. I'm the CEO of Elements.cloud. I've been a customer of Salesforce since 2001. And before that, I was with Accenture. And pretty much all of that time, I've been involved in business analysis and implementation of software. So this is 20 years experience distilled into the next 20 minutes or so. So first of all, business analysis is a valuable role. You can see here from the salary estimates that it's a well-paid role. And the quote at the bottom there, business process is the #1 skill most frequently requested by employers for Salesforce admins. So it's an important skill that you need to learn, and it will, if you're an admin, it will support you in terms of the work you're doing. Or if you're a business analyst, then it will be the majority of your job, as we'll find out in a few minutes. Or if you're a consultant, it's a key skill to have when you're working with customers. So the business analysis skills I want to talk about are important if you're a solo admin. Obviously, it's not 100% of your day, but still it's not zero. If you are working with a big team, there may be dedicated business analysts where this obviously is the majority of your work. But it doesn't matter whether you're solo admin, working in a small team, or working in a big team. These skills are really critical to making sure that you deliver the systems that your end users want. When we looked at org confessions, when we looked at the root cause analysis, one of the highest issues was poor analysis. And what I mean by that is that people hadn't really understood exactly what the end users had wanted, and therefore what the systems they built weren't the ones that the end users needed, and therefore there was poor adoption. And if you've seen any of my previous sessions, you can link poor analysis to poor adoption. So when I look at the skills mix and business analysis, people think about the technical skills, how to write requirements, how to map processes, how to do data modeling, how to write user stories. So they are the traditional business analysis skills. On top of that, we need to understand the Salesforce architecture. So it's no good just building in isolation, building and doing the analysis and coming out with a solution which can't be implemented with Salesforce. So you will be colored, or some of the decisions you make will be shaped by what you know about Salesforce and what's possible. The next title there, estimating risk and complexity. That becomes important as you start thinking about what you're architecting, what the analysis you're doing, and therefore the solution, so you can start to put some risk analysis on those user stories. And finally, you'll be running essentially many projects, so you need some project management skills. Now, all of these are learnt skills. They're not natural skills that you're born with. Every one of them can be developed over time, and there's plenty of training around to support you in all of these different skills. So they're the technical skills, but that's only half the story. There are a set of business or soft skills, as they're sometimes described, that are really important to make sure that you can start to deliver that business analysis. The first is listening. And by listening, I mean listening so you're actually understanding what people want. There's a very big difference between listening, which is waiting for the other person to stop talking so you can start talking, versus listening so you're really absorbing what they need. Listening to understand the nuances of what they said, so you can start to question, start to probe, start to really understand what the end user really wants. You need to be able to present. I present the solution back to an end user so that they go, yes, that's what I need. Present at the beginning of a workshop to set the scene. So you will have ideas, you'll have concepts, and you need to have great presentation skills. You need to be able to facilitate workshops. So you won't necessarily be doing one-on-one interviewing with end users. You'll be talking to teams of users, teams of subject matter experts, and facilitating those workshops is really important. Understanding how people play off each other, understanding when to let the discussion run and when to close it down. The next set of skills is questioning. You're not there just as the scribe to write down what people want. You're there to push back and go, okay, yeah, I know you said that, but is that what you meant? So the ability to question without causing problems, without putting people's back up, being able to question so you can start to dig into more detail to really understand what people want. The aim obviously of analysis is to understand exactly what the business users need to make sure you're building the right solution. So hence the questioning. Clearly you need strong communication skills. Those are even more important now when many of those sessions you will be doing will be remote. And it's quite difficult when you're not in the room. You don't necessarily see the body language when you're only seeing people's heads on Zoom calls. So those communication skills, again, being brought to the fore, particularly now we're all running remote workshops. Your subject matter experts could be anywhere in the world. They could be from different countries, and therefore your ability to understand the nuances of language is also really important. And finally, politics with a small p. Understanding the power in the room, who really genuinely has the say, making sure that you can tiptoe around the politics of the different people in the workshop that you're facilitating. So let's just think about analysis in the context of the whole implementation lifecycle. And those of you who've heard me speak before will have seen this diagram. This life cycle is how we go through every step to get from a requirement down here, which is driven from feedback, through mapping processes, doing the analysis of those, the changes we're suggesting, writing user stories, then into the build phase, configure code, document, test, then into the deliver phase, back up the metadata, deploy the changes, load data, then release into production, monitoring the system, back up and restore, tracking compliance, that people are following due process, and then training and gathering feedback, and then we go around the cycle again. This cycle is true for every systems implementation. For Salesforce, obviously, it's critically important because we're going around the cycle multiple times. And the trick with this cycle, as it says on the left-hand side, is to, first of all, make sure that what we're building is what the end users want, so therefore we're driving up adoption. There's no point starting in the analysis phase here, not doing enough work here, jumping straight into build, through deliver into operate, and then discovering that the end users aren't using the application you've built. And that's really because of poor analysis. So one of the things I talk about is that you shouldn't leave the analysis phase and go into build until you are 100% sure you've really genuinely understood what the users need, not what they thought they wanted. The next thing is agility. We need to be able to go around this cycle as quickly as possible to make sure that the systems we're building can support the agility of the business. As we are going through COVID and then post-COVID, those business models are going to be changing quite dramatically as people work out exactly how to operate in the post-COVID world. That means the systems we're building need to be able to support those changing business models, which means we need to be able to go around this cycle really quickly. Quick spoiler alert, you can't skip any steps. Every one of these steps needs to be done. If you are driving a really agile business approach, then maybe you're not spending very long on each one because you've got quite a small scope of work that you're doing through each different sprint, but you are going around every single step. And finally, trust. We want to go around this cycle quickly, but we certainly don't want to be going around at a speed where we're not doing sufficient analysis, and therefore what we're building breaks the org, and therefore we are putting the business at risk. So I just think about those purple boxes and think about a high-level process, if you will, around that analysis cycle. So we're capturing requirements, which could be feedback, statement of work, suggestions, some random wishes, and a few gems. So just because someone raises a requirement doesn't necessarily mean that A, it's valid, or B, it's complete, or C, we're going to implement it. And this is where those analysis skills, those questioning skills come in. We need to be able to write those requirements down. So we think about the technical skills of capturing requirements. Those are raw requirements which we can then validate through the business processes that we're mapping out. So again, running live workshops, mapping business processes with the end users will then validate the requirements, but also identify new requirements. When we're comfortable that we genuinely have got the view of what those business processes should look like, and that again will take time in a workshop. It could be an hour workshop with multiple users. Those workshops, from experience, having run thousands of them, there's periods of time in the workshop where it seems to be complete chaos and you'll never come out of it. But have confidence that you can make your way through it. And in at the end of the presentation, I'll give you a series of resources. In one of the resources, there's some training content, and part of that, there's a section on how to run remote workshops. So we come out of the back of those process mapping workshops with a set of final requirements from which we can write user stories. And those user stories are the technical requirements that we will then pass through to the development team. At the same time, we're analyzing those user stories, so we give them a risk level, which means we can then start to understand the overall risk of any release. So 2 seconds on process mapping. For those of you who are used to drawing flowcharts with swim lanes, this is not a replacement. Think of this as an upgrade. It's called UPN, Universal Process Notation. A couple of things just to talk about the diagramming approach. First of all, not many boxes on a screen, 8 or 10 boxes. That's because we want to keep it simple. We want to make sure that these process diagrams can be used as training material when we've implemented the system, and the confused mind says no. If you have 50 boxes, you just glaze over. If you want to get into more detail, you can see that some of the boxes here have a corner. That means there is a lower level diagram with more detail. Next thing, every box starts with a verb: resolve, test, analyze, fix. Again, very simple principle, but it's extremely powerful when you're doing your analysis to start everyone with a verb. If I had the word which was testing, that doesn't have nearly as much information as test issue. There are no swim lanes. Instead of having a swim lane, we have a resource along the bottom: test, technical support, customer, technical support. We could have a system on there. The reason this makes it easier to read the diagrams is because you're not trying to lay boxes out on particular swim lanes, and therefore the diagrams end up being quite unwieldy. Here, the flow is a very natural left to right flow. And talking about flow, we have flow lines that go between boxes. So first of all, every box must have a line between another box, and every line must have text. You will discover in your analysis that you spend more time debating the names and getting definitions, getting clarity on what's the output, what's on the line, than necessarily the box. So when we say resolve technical support request, what does a resolve mean? Does it mean we have a fix? Does it mean we have a fix that's in pipeline but hasn't been delivered yet? Does it mean we have a fix that's been delivered and the customer has proven it in their implementation? So again, understanding and getting clarity on what those words are is really important. And that's why boxes without lines or boxes without lines without text are a waste of time. And finally, you can see here, if you may want to attach notes, you could attach requirements, you could attach metadata items to any activity box using a paperclip. So this idea of relating the activity box for more information, which metadata items are changed, which requirements are supported by this particular process. So all these different items of analysis all come together and cross-relate. So the second type of modeling is data modeling. You need to understand the data architecture because that will then influence the way we write those user stories. So you need to decide if you need to add new objects, whether you're extending objects, whether you're changing relationships between objects. So there's a great Trailhead trail that takes you through how to do data modeling. Again, data modeling has some very, very proven and understood notations. That means that a zero to many relationship. So this little data model here is of a band. I played bass guitar in a band, and we decided to build a little Salesforce app for managing the band. Clearly at the center of it is the gig, which is rather like an opportunity. And we have venues where we get booked, and there are other bands we play with. What we discovered was the booking manager actually floats between venues, and the booking manager is critical because a booking manager will book you for multiple gigs in multiple venues. So instead of a booking manager being a field on venue, we discovered that they had to be a completely separate object. And really important to discover at the analysis phase rather than discover it when we'd already built the application, because it's then very painful to pull that back out and rebuild some of the structures. So again, the architecture, just like when you're architecting a house, getting that architecture right before you start will save you a huge level of pain longer term. So the other technical tool is user stories. These are the technical specifications that you're passing to the development team. Think of requirements as the business requirement, and a user story is the technical requirement. And again, fortunately, user stories have a very standard format. As a ... I want to, so that I can. The thing that we've added is the idea of a risk level. Based on the metadata items that are changed or influenced by this user story, we can assign a risk level, high, medium, or low. With that risk level, we can then decide the risk level of the release, and therefore what the development path could be for that release. So we think about this life cycle and now overlay on top of it all these this documentation. You can see that requirements, processes and data models, org analysis, user stories are all put into this central repository, your metadata dictionary, throughout the course of the analysis phase, but then are reused by development. They're reused in the delivery phase. They're reused when we start to train people, when we prove compliance. And therefore, as we go around the cycle again, we're building on that content. So again, when you start thinking about the materials that you're creating, don't think of them as a one-off just for the project. You're going to reuse them. So an example would be that process map that we created here will be reused for compliance. It will be reused for training. The user stories that we create are being used by the development teams. The process maps are being used by the testing teams to be able to perform user acceptance testing. When we're doing the data load, we'll be using the entity relationship diagrams, the data models, to make sure we understand the data structures. So the ability to be agile and rapidly go around the cycle is the ability to reuse this documentation, have it in a format which everyone can use, and then a central repository, which means that people aren't hunting for the correct version of the documentation. So again, these are principles that are well understood out in the ecosystem. This is not new, this is not novel. The idea of building process maps, capturing requirements, writing user stories, and building data models, none of this is new, which is why there's training material out there. So if you're a solo admin or if part of a business analysis team, understanding these principles means you can communicate with the rest of the organization in terms that they understand, which is why it's such important foundational skills. So key takeaways. These are valuable foundational skills. Whether you are a solo admin, whether you're a dedicated business analyst, or you're a consultant, having these skills under your belt are really, really important. We've talked about they're a combination of both business and technical skills. They are learnt skills. You don't naturally have strong communication skills or strong process mapping skills. These are skills that can be learnt. My advice is that you don't necessarily try learning these skills in the first live workshop with 15 of the most senior people in the organization. This is a chance to go and play. Think about things that happen outside your work world. Maybe you're volunteering with a non-profit. Maybe you're supporting a school. Maybe so you can think of anything as a small project to hone these analysis skills. We think about our example. We wanted to go and build an app to support the band. We did the analysis. We built the data model. We then wrote those user stories to then build the application inside Salesforce. So any of the Trailhead projects that you're doing, to go through and get your Trailhead badges or to get your Admin 201, you will be starting to use these analysis skills throughout the course of those projects. So just become aware of where you're using those skills. And as I said, they're learnt, but they're also transferable skills. It doesn't matter whether you're implementing Salesforce or Pardot or another application, these skills are valuable and transferable. If you're moving and transitioning from being an admin to a business analyst or from an admin to a consultant, again, those skills will help you make that transfer. And finally, some resources. There is a success community, a business analyst success community run by Tony Martin. She's fantastic, great a bunch of people on that community who are happy to answer questions. We've built some training material at train.elements.cloud/BA, which take you through that life cycle, and particularly focused on the analysis piece. The reason we built those is that there's some training in Trailhead, but some of the other things I've talked about aren't yet in Trailhead, which is obviously why we're doing these Trailhead Live sessions. So there's some training there, not specific to the Elements.cloud software at all, but some specific training material about the principles. As I said, there is a Trailhead training on data modeling, and there's an article about bit.ly, so bit.ly, not bit slash, remove the slash, bit.ly/developinprod, which talks about how to understand the risk of releases to accelerate your development. So thank you for joining me in this short Trailhead Live session. If you want to get hold of me, my email address and Twitter handle were on at the beginning of the presentation, ian@elements.cloud, or on Twitter @IanGotts, or come and find me on LinkedIn. So thank you very much for joining me.